My name is Heather. I'm 34 years old, and last Thanksgiving, my parents broke my heart. After 2 years of minimal contact, I thought our family reunion would heal old wounds. Instead, when my children and I arrived, we found 12 perfectly arranged place settings at the table, none for us. As my 8-year-old daughter Emma clutched my hand and 6-year-old Noah asked why we were still standing, I made a decision that would change everything. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family who treated you like you didn't exist. Growing up, I was the quintessential golden child in my family. My parents, Robert and Nancy, had high expectations that I diligently met. I graduated at the top of my class, secured a scholarship to a prestigious university, and landed a promising job at a marketing firm in Chicago right after graduation. My parents proudly displayed my achievements to friends and family like trophies. Our Heather, they'd say, always makes the right decisions. That narrative began to crack when I met Brandon during my second year at the firm. He was charming, creative, and worked in graphic design, a field my status-conscious parents considered unstable. When I brought him home to meet them during Christmas, my father's handshake was firm but brief, and my mother's smile never quite reached her eyes. "He seems nice," my mother said afterward, her tone suggesting the opposite. "But is he really going anywhere with that art career?" Despite their reservations, Brandon and I fell deeply in love. We married after 18 months of dating in a modest ceremony, a far cry from the extravagant wedding my parents had envisioned for me. They attended, of course, but their congratulations felt perfunctory. My father's toast focused more on my accomplishments than our union. When I became pregnant with Emma a year later, my parents softened somewhat. The prospect of grandchildren appealed to them, especially since my younger brother Thomas wasn't settling down anytime soon. They bought us expensive baby furniture and offered advice, sometimes welcome, often not. "You should really consider moving to a better school district before she's born," my mother suggested, knowing full well we couldn't afford it on our combined salaries. Noah came 2 years after Emma. By then, the cracks in my marriage had begun to show. Brandon worked long hours trying to establish his freelance business, while I juggled a reduced schedule at the marketing firm with caring for Emma. The financial strain and sleep deprivation took their toll on our relationship. My parents noticed the tension during family gatherings and didn't hesitate to point it out. "This is what happens when you rush into marriage," my father commented after witnessing a terse exchange between Brandon and me at Noah's first birthday party. When Brandon and I separated 3 years ago, my parents didn't even attempt to hide their "I told you so" attitudes. What hurt most was how they framed our divorce as my failure, my poor judgment in choosing Brandon, my inability to make the marriage work. "You could have had anyone," Heather, my mother sighed during one particularly painful conversation. "A doctor, a lawyer, someone stable." The divorce hit me hard financially. I took on a second job teaching evening marketing classes at a community college to supplement my income. My apartment with the kids was small but comfortable, located in a decent neighborhood with good schools. Brandon paid child support when he could, but his design business was still inconsistent. My parents offered financial help exactly once, with conditions attached. "We could help you with a down payment on a house in our neighborhood," my father proposed. "It would be better for the children to grow up near us." Their neighborhood was an hour away from my workplace and the kids' school. The implication was clear: if they helped me, I'd have to rearrange my entire life according to their preferences. I declined. For the past 3 years, family gatherings had been tense affairs. My parents doted on my brother Thomas's accomplishments while questioning my parenting decisions in front of everyone. They bought lavish gifts for my children, but delivered them with backhanded comments. "I thought Emma should have something nice to wear," my mother would say, handing my daughter an expensive dress. "I wasn't sure if you could afford proper clothes these days." Despite everything, I kept trying. I called them weekly. I sent photos of the kids. I invited them to school performances and sports games, which they occasionally attended. I believed family was worth fighting for, and I wanted my children to have grandparents in their lives. Last year, we spent Thanksgiving separately. My parents traveled to Florida to visit distant relatives, while the kids and I had a small celebration at home with a few friends. This year would be different. 2 months before Thanksgiving, my mother called to invite us to their house. "We're having everyone over," she said. "Thomas will be there with his new girlfriend, Aunt Judith and Uncle Philip, Cousin Rebecca and her husband and kids. It would be nice if you and the children came too." It wasn't the warmest invitation, but it felt like an olive branch. For weeks, I prepared the kids for the reunion. We talked about being on our best behavior. Emma practiced a Thanksgiving poem she wanted to recite for everyone. Noah drew pictures of turkeys for each family member. I spent hours making my grandmother's famous pumpkin pie from scratch, a peace offering of sorts. The morning of Thanksgiving, I dressed the kids in their nicest outfits. Emma wore a burgundy dress with a matching headband, while Noah looked adorable in khaki pants and a sweater vest. "You both look perfect," I told them, snapping photos in our living room. "Grandma and Grandpa will be so happy to see you." The drive to my parents' suburban home took 45 minutes. As we pulled into their circular driveway, my stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Several cars were already parked outside. We weren't the first to arrive, but certainly not the last. "Remember, best behavior," I reminded the kids as we walked up the path, balancing the pumpkin pie in one hand and a bag of small gifts in the other. My mother answered the door wearing an elegant cream-colored blouse and pearls. Her smile was polite but reserved. "You're here," she said, stepping aside to let us in. "Everyone's in the living room. No hug. No, you look lovely," or "I've missed you." Just "you're here," as if confirming a delivery rather than greeting her daughter and grandchildren. Little did I know that this cold reception was just the beginning of what would become the most humiliating family gathering of my life. The entryway to my parents' house was festooned with autumn decorations, a tasteful wreath of dried leaves and berries on the door, miniature pumpkins lining the console table, and the familiar scent of cinnamon and cloves wafting from somewhere deeper in the house. Everything was picture perfect, as always in my mother's domain. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, following her toward the kitchen. "No need," she replied without turning around. "Patricia helped me prepare everything yesterday." Patricia was my aunt, my father's sister, who had always been my mother's favorite in-law. The dismissal stung slightly, but I pushed the feeling aside. Today was about new beginnings. In the spacious living room, family members were clustered in conversation groups. My brother Thomas stood by the fireplace with his arm around a willowy blonde woman I assumed was his new girlfriend. Aunt Judith and Uncle Philip occupied the love seat, while my cousins Rebecca and her husband David chatted with my father near the bay window. Their children played with building blocks on the carpet alongside 2 other kids I recognized as my cousin Michael's. "Look who's here," my father announced, his voice carrying the same forced enthusiasm he used at his corporate events. A chorus of hellos followed, some warmer than others. Thomas approached and gave me a brief hug before bending down to greet Emma and Noah. "Hey, Squirts," he said, ruffling Noah's carefully combed hair. "You've grown about a foot since I last saw you." "I learned a poem," Emma said eagerly, looking up at her uncle. "Cool," Thomas replied absently, already straightening up. "Oh, let me introduce you to Melissa." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of superficial conversations. I noticed my mother disappearing frequently to the kitchen, emerging occasionally to refill drinks or rearrange appetizers on the coffee table. Not once did she ask if we wanted anything to drink or eat, though she made a point of asking everyone else. Noah tugged at my sleeve after a while. "Mom, I'm thirsty," he whispered. "Let's find you some water," I said, leading him toward the kitchen. Inside, my mother was arranging sliced vegetables on a serving platter. The countertops were covered with dishes in various stages of preparation, and the air was thick with the aroma of roasting turkey. "Mom, could Noah have some water, please?" I asked. She glanced up briefly. "Glasses are in the usual cabinet. The filtered water is in the refrigerator." I helped Noah with his drink, feeling like a guest rather than family. When we returned to the living room, Emma had found a spot on the floor near her cousins, but wasn't quite included in their play. Around 4:30, my mother appeared in the archway connecting the living room to the dining room. She tapped a spoon against her crystal glass, a familiar signal from my childhood that meant an announcement was coming. "Dinner is ready," she announced with a practiced hostess smile. "Everyone please make your way to the dining room." The family rose in a collective movement, conversations pausing as everyone filed toward the formal dining room. I took Emma's hand and gestured for Noah to follow as we joined the procession. The scene that greeted us in the dining room struck me like a physical blow. My mother's antique mahogany table had been extended to its full length and covered with her finest linen tablecloth. Atop it sat her best china, crystal glasses, and polished silver, all arranged with mathematical precision. A magnificent centerpiece of autumn flowers and candles ran down the middle, flanked by serving dishes of steaming food. But what froze me in place were the place settings. Exactly 12 of them, one for each person present, except for me and my children. For a moment, I thought there must be a mistake. Perhaps we were seated at a separate kids' table? But a quick glance around revealed no other dining arrangement. As family members found their seats, clearly marked with elegant place cards, my children and I remained standing uncertainly in the doorway. Emma's hand tightened in mine as the awkwardness stretched. Finally, my father noticed us hovering. "Nancy," he said to my mother, who was directing people to their seats, "where are Heather and the kids sitting?" My mother barely looked up from adjusting a napkin. "Oh, I couldn't fit 3 more at the table. Space is tight as it is." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "They can eat at the breakfast nook after the first round. Or take plates to the patio furniture if the weather holds." The casual cruelty of her words hung in the air. Thomas looked uncomfortable, his girlfriend confused. Aunt Judith suddenly became very interested in arranging her napkin on her lap. No one spoke up. Noah, not fully understanding but sensing the tension, looked up at me with confusion. "Mommy, where do we sit?" Before I could answer, my mother interjected. "The children could sit at the counter in the kitchen if they're hungry now. Heather, you could help serve and then eat after. Like the help, not like family." Emma, old enough to fully comprehend what was happening, pressed against my side. I could feel her small body trembling slightly. My cousin Rebecca's husband David cleared his throat. "We could squeeze together on this side," he suggested, though the table was already uncomfortably crowded. No, my mother said firmly. "I've arranged everything just so. It would throw off the whole setting. The whole setting, more important than her daughter and grandchildren." "We brought pumpkin pie," Emma said in a small voice, still clutching the container we'd carried in. "Mommy made it from scratch." My mother glanced at the container dismissively. "You can leave it on the counter. We have plenty of desserts already prepared." I stood there, paralyzed by humiliation, as everyone else settled into their chairs. My father said a brief grace, and serving dishes began circulating around the table. Conversation resumed as if nothing unusual was happening, as if it was perfectly normal for family members to be left standing in the doorway during Thanksgiving dinner. Noah tugged at my hand. "I'm hungry, Mommy," he whispered, loud enough that several heads turned briefly our way before quickly averting their eyes. That was the moment something inside me broke. And simultaneously, something else hardened into resolve. I've always been the peacekeeper in my family, the one who smoothed things over, who accommodated others' feelings at the expense of my own. But standing there in my parents' dining room doorway, with my children bewildered and hurt beside me, I knew with sudden clarity that this pattern couldn't continue. "Emma, Noah," I said quietly but firmly, "we're leaving." Emma looked up at me, relief washing over her features even as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Noah just looked confused. "But what about the turkey?" he asked. "We'll find something better," I promised, trying to keep my voice steady. I turned to address the table, where 12 people were now pointedly focusing on their plates. "We won't be staying for dinner. Thank you for the invitation, but we decline." My mother's head snapped up, her expression a mixture of irritation and surprise, not at what she had done, but that I was reacting to it. "Don't be dramatic, Heather," she said sharply. "You're making a scene over nothing. We simply don't have enough space." "You had 2 months to plan this dinner," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. "You knew exactly how many people were coming. This was a deliberate choice." My father put down his fork with a sigh of exasperation. "For heaven's sake, Heather. The children can eat in the kitchen. It's not the end of the world." "It's Thanksgiving," I said, my voice finally breaking. "Family sits together at Thanksgiving." "Well, sometimes accommodations have to be made," my mother replied. "If you'd called earlier to confirm you were coming." "I RSVP'd when you invited us," I interrupted. 2 months ago. "And I called last week to ask what I could bring." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Thomas looked like he wanted to say something but remained silent, his girlfriend watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Let's go get our coats," I told the children, turning away from the table. As we headed toward the entryway where we'd left our jackets, I heard chairs scraping. My Aunt Judith's voice carried down the hall. "Nancy, I can't believe you did that to your own grandchildren." In the hallway, Emma's composure finally broke. Silent tears streamed down her face as I helped her into her coat. "Why doesn't Grandma want us here?" Noah asked, his little face crumpled in confusion. The question stabbed through me like a knife. How could I explain to a 6-year-old child that his grandmother's need for control and appearances outweighed her love for him? "Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices," I said, kneeling to zip his jacket. "This isn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong." My mother appeared in the hallway as I was gathering our things. Her posture was rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're overreacting," she said. "If you leave now, you're ruining Thanksgiving for everyone." I straightened up, looking her directly in the eyes. "No, Mom. You ruined Thanksgiving when you decided your grandchildren weren't important enough to have seats at your table." "That's not what happened," she protested. "We simply don't have space." "Yes, I heard you the first time." I reached for the pumpkin pie Emma was still clutching. "We'll take this with us. I'm sure you have plenty of desserts already prepared." My father appeared behind my mother, his face flushed with irritation. "Heather, stop this nonsense right now. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "No, Dad. For once, I'm acknowledging the mountain instead of pretending it's a molehill." As we moved toward the front door, I heard my mother's voice, not quite low enough, say to my father, "I told you she shouldn't have come anyway." Always so sensitive. The words hit me like a slap. After everything, after the humiliation of being left standing in the doorway, after my children were treated as afterthoughts, she still believed I was the problem. I ushered the kids outside, helping them into the car as quickly as possible. Emma was quietly crying now, trying to hide her tears. Noah looked shell-shocked, clutching his turkey drawings that no one had wanted to see. As I pulled out of the driveway, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. The kids were hungry. It was Thanksgiving, and I had nothing prepared at home. All the grocery stores would be closed. 5 miles down the road, I spotted a McDonald's with its lights on. Not ideal, but it was food. "How about a special Thanksgiving Happy Meal?" I suggested, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. Noah perked up immediately. Fast food was a rare treat in our household, but Emma just stared out the window. Inside the McDonald's, we were the only customers. The teenage cashier looked bored, but managed a smile as we approached. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said. "What can I get you?" 3 Big Mac meals, please," I replied. "And 2 Happy Meals?" We settled into a booth with our food. I arranged it on the tray as festively as possible, putting the French fries in a circle around the burgers like a makeshift feast. "Look," I said, unwrapping a napkin with a flourish. "Fancy Thanksgiving napkins." Noah giggled, but Emma remained quiet, picking at her food. I said gently, "I'm sorry about what happened." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Why does Grandma hate us?" The question gutted me. "She doesn't hate us, sweetheart." Grandma and Grandpa. I struggled to find words that wouldn't vilify my parents while still acknowledging the truth. They have very specific ideas about how things should be, and sometimes they forget what's really important. Like family. Noah asked around a mouthful of burger. Exactly like family, I confirmed. We ate our unconventional Thanksgiving dinner, and I tried my hardest to lighten the mood. We played I Spy, made up stories about the people in the drive-thru, and shared what we were thankful for. By the time we finished our apple pies, the kids seemed less devastated, though Emma remained subdued. The drive home to our apartment felt endless. Both children fell asleep in the back seat, emotionally drained from the day's events. As I navigated the quiet streets, tears I'd been holding back finally escaped, streaming silently down my face. For years, I'd made excuses for my parents' behavior. They're just old-fashioned. They have high standards. They show love in different ways. But today had stripped away all pretense. Their actions weren't about lack of space at a table. They were about putting me and my children in our place, a place apart, less than, not quite family. When we arrived home, I carried Noah to his bed and guided a sleepy Emma to hers. After tucking them in, I sank onto my couch in the quiet apartment and let myself fully feel the pain, humiliation, and anger I'd been suppressing for the sake of the children. The Thanksgiving that was supposed to heal our family had instead revealed the depth of the wound. And I realized, with a clarity that felt both terrible and liberating, that it was time to stop trying to heal something that one side was determined to keep broken. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake replaying the events at my parents' house, each memory bringing fresh waves of hurt and anger. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep altogether and moved to the living room with a cup of tea and a notebook. Perhaps it was the quiet darkness or the emotional exhaustion, but my mind began to trace patterns I'd previously refused to see. The Thanksgiving table incident wasn't an isolated event. It was merely the most obvious manifestation of a lifelong dynamic. I started writing, documenting incidents I'd previously dismissed or excused. My high school graduation party, where my mother had introduced me to her friends as our perfect daughter, while simultaneously criticizing my choice of dress when no one else could hear. My college acceptance letters, which my father had shown to everyone at his office, but then questioned why I hadn't applied to more prestigious schools. The way they'd undermined my confidence in Brandon from the beginning, pointing out his flaws while never acknowledging his kindness or how happy he made me. How after our divorce, they'd offered help in ways that would increase my dependence on them rather than support my independence. The subtle ways they favored Thomas, despite his less stable career path and personal choices. The countless times they'd given gifts to my children with strings attached or used to highlight my perceived inadequacies as a parent. The pattern was undeniable. Their love had always been conditional, available in full measure only when I conformed to their expectations. When I diverged from their script for my life, their support and affection withdrew accordingly. As dawn broke, my phone chimed with a text from Rachel, my best friend since college. "How was Thanksgiving with the family? Thinking of you." Rather than trying to explain via text, I called her. "You won't believe what happened," I said when she answered, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. I recounted the previous day's events. "They did what?" Rachel exclaimed when I described the dining room scene. "Heather, that's not just rude, that's cruel. Especially to the kids." "I know," I said, the validation from an outside perspective strengthening my resolve. "And the worst part is, I don't think they even see it that way." My mother genuinely seemed surprised that I was upset. Because she's never had to face consequences for treating you this way, Rachel pointed out. You've always forgiven them, made excuses for them, tried harder to please them. Her words hit home. You're right. I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn their approval, and they've spent it moving the goalposts. We talked for over an hour, Rachel listening as I processed my thoughts aloud. Unlike my parents, she asked questions instead of making pronouncements, offered support without conditions. So what now? She finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. I can't pretend nothing happened. I can't go back to Sunday phone calls and forced holiday visits, not after this. Then don't, Rachel said simply. You're allowed to set boundaries, Heather. You're allowed to protect yourself and your kids from people who hurt you, even if those people are your parents. After we hung up, I sat with that thought. Boundaries. The concept wasn't new to me. I'd read about them in self-help books, discussed them in the therapy sessions I'd attended after my divorce. But I'd never seriously applied the concept to my relationship with my parents. What would boundaries with Robert and Nancy Mitchell actually look like? I opened my notebook again and began a new list. This one wasn't of past hurts, but of future protections. No more subjecting the children to situations where they might be treated as less than. No more accepting criticism disguised as help. No more rearranging our lives to accommodate my parents' expectations. No more pretending their behavior is acceptable. The list felt right, but incomplete. Something was still nagging at me, some unfinished business that needed addressing before I could move forward with these new boundaries. I went to my desk and pulled out a folder labeled Family Business. Inside were records of the many ways I'd supported my parents over the years, often at my own expense. Financial records showing the $5,000 emergency loan I'd given them 3 years ago when their roof needed unexpected repairs, money they'd never repaid despite my tight budget as a newly single mother. Documentation of the family heirlooms my grandmother had specifically left to me in her will, which somehow remained in my parents' house, for safekeeping. Receipts for the high-end KitchenAid mixer and Vitamix blender I'd lent my mother temporarily that she now considered her own. Files related to my father's small business website and social media accounts, which I'd been managing for free since my marketing background made me the obvious choice. I'd given freely, expecting nothing in return except perhaps appreciation. Instead, my generosity had been taken for granted, my contributions minimized or forgotten entirely. A plan began to take shape in my mind. If my parents wanted to treat me as less than family, then perhaps it was time to formalize that relationship in ways they would understand. I spent the morning creating a detailed inventory of everything I had lent, given, or done for my parents that could reasonably be reclaimed or discontinued. The list was longer than I'd initially realized. Beyond the tangible items, there were countless hours of unpaid labor, managing their online presence, helping organize family events, providing free childcare for my cousins' children during family gatherings while my own parents rarely reciprocated. When Emma and Noah woke up later that morning, I made them chocolate chip pancakes, a special treat to brighten the day after Thanksgiving. Are we going to see Grandma and Grandpa today? Noah asked as he drowned his pancakes in syrup. No, sweetheart. We're going to have a special day, just the 3 of us instead. Emma studied me carefully, her 8-year-old perception surprisingly acute. Are you mad at them because they didn't let us sit at the table? I put down my coffee cup, considering how to respond. My children deserved honesty, but not the burden of adult conflicts. I'm not mad, I said finally. I'm sad. What happened yesterday wasn't right, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes, even grown-ups don't treat each other with respect. Like when Justin pushed Max on the playground and had to sit in timeout? Noah asked, referencing a recent incident at school. I smiled despite myself. Something like that. Except grown-ups don't get put in timeout. Instead, we have to decide for ourselves how to respond when someone doesn't treat us well. What did you decide? Emma asked quietly. I decided that we deserve to be around people who make us feel loved and important, I told her. And sometimes that means spending less time with people who don't. Emma nodded, seeming to absorb this. Even if those people are family? Even then, I confirmed. Being family is special, but it doesn't give anyone the right to make you feel bad about yourself. After breakfast, we spent the day decorating our apartment for Christmas, watching holiday movies, and baking cookies. I made a point of being fully present, pushing thoughts of my parents aside to focus on creating a joyful day for my children. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I finalized my plan. I would reclaim what was rightfully mine, not out of pettiness or revenge, but as a concrete step toward establishing boundaries and self-respect. I would take back my possessions, my time, and most importantly, my power in the relationship. I knew my parents would be attending their church's holiday bazaar the following Saturday, a full-day event they never missed. It would be the perfect opportunity to retrieve my belongings without a confrontation. I also knew where they kept the spare key, having used it countless times to water plants or check on the house when they traveled. The plan wasn't about hurting them, it was about healing myself. About showing my children through actions, not just words, that we deserved respect. That we could stand up for ourselves with dignity. With my decision made, I slept soundly for the first time since Thanksgiving. The week passed in a blur of work, school drop-offs, and preparations. My parents called twice, my mother on Friday, my father on Sunday, but I let both calls go to voicemail. My mother's message was predictably self-justifying. Heather, I don't understand why you're making such a fuss over the seating arrangements. We did the best we could with the space available. Call me back so we can move past this nonsense. My father's was more direct. Your mother is upset. Call her and apologize for overreacting on Thanksgiving. This silent treatment is childish. Neither message acknowledged any wrongdoing or expressed concern for how their grandchildren had been affected. Their responses only reinforced my resolve. On Wednesday evening, I called my brother Thomas. We'd always had a complicated relationship, not close, but not antagonistic either. As the favored child, he'd been largely oblivious to the different standards our parents held us to. Hey, what's up? He answered, sounding distracted. I wanted to let you know I'll be stopping by Mom and Dad's on Saturday to pick up some things that belong to me, I said, getting straight to the point. Oh! There was a pause. They mentioned you guys left Thanksgiving early. Mom said you got upset over nothing. Thomas, they didn't have places for us at the table. They left their grandchildren standing in the doorway while everyone else ate. How would you characterize that? Another pause, longer this time. Yeah, that was pretty bad. Melissa couldn't believe it. She kept asking me afterward if that was normal for our family. And what did you tell her? He sighed. I told her no, but I don't know, Heather. The more I think about it, the more I realize maybe it's not that unusual. They've always been harder on you than on me. His acknowledgement, however belated, meant more than I expected. Anyway, I continued, I'm picking up some things on Saturday. Grandma's jewelry that was supposed to be mine, the kitchen appliances I lent Mom, some childhood mementos. I'm not taking anything that isn't rightfully mine. They're going to be pissed, Thomas warned. Probably, I agreed. But I'm done letting that dictate my actions. After some more conversation, Thomas surprised me. Do you want me to be there? For support or as a witness or whatever? The offer touched me. Thanks, but this is something I need to do myself. I appreciate you understanding. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't say anything at Thanksgiving. I should have. Yes, you should have, I agreed, not letting him off the hook entirely. But thanks for acknowledging that now. Saturday morning arrived bright and cold. I'd arranged for Rachel to watch Emma and Noah, telling them I had some errands to run. They were happy enough to spend time with Aunt Rachel, who always brought fun crafts and games. As I drove to my parents' house, I mentally rehearsed what I would do. I had brought boxes and bags for the items I planned to take. I knew exactly where everything was located, an advantage of having spent so much time in their home over the years. Their driveway was empty when I arrived, confirming they were at the church bazaar as expected. I used the spare key from under the decorative rock in the garden. They'd never changed its location despite my suggestions to do so for security reasons. Standing in their entryway, I was struck by a wave of memories, some good, many complicated. The house I'd grown up in felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. I took a deep breath and began my methodical retrieval. First, the kitchen. The KitchenAid mixer and Vitamix blender sat prominently on the counter, appliances I'd purchased with my first big marketing bonus and lent to my mother just until the renovation is done. That had been 4 years ago. I packed them carefully in their original boxes, which I'd stored in my own basement. Next, my grandmother's jewelry. My mother kept it in a velvet-lined drawer in her bedroom vanity. According to my grandmother's will, the antique pearl necklace, emerald ring, and gold locket were specifically bequeathed to me. Yet somehow, after the funeral, these pieces had remained in my mother's possession, for safekeeping until you're more settled, she'd said. Well, I was settled now, and these treasured family heirlooms belonged with me and eventually Emma. In the guest room closet, I found boxes of my childhood memorabilia, report cards, art projects, awards, and photographs. My mother had always been meticulous about preserving these things, which I'd previously interpreted as loving attention to my history. Now I wondered if it had been more about documenting her successful parenting than preserving my memories. I selected items that held personal significance. My high school yearbooks, the science fair medal I'd won in 8th grade, the collection of handwritten stories I'd created as a child. I left behind anything that felt more like evidence of their parenting than genuine mementos of my life. In my father's office, I accessed his computer. The password had been my birth date for years, and downloaded all the files related to his business website and social media accounts that I'd been managing. I then removed my administrator access from all platforms after carefully documenting all login information in a sealed envelope I left on his desk. The last item on my list was the emergency fund. 3 years ago, when my parents' roof had unexpectedly needed replacing, I'd lent them $5,000 from my savings, money that had been earmarked for my own home down payment. They'd promised to repay me within 6 months, but whenever I'd gently brought it up since then, they'd changed the subject or claimed financial constraints despite their comfortable lifestyle. I knew they kept emergency cash in a fireproof safe in their closet. My father had shown it to me when asking me to check on the house during their vacations. The combination was my mother's birth year. Inside, as expected, were several envelopes of cash, clearly labeled car repairs, home maintenance, travel fund, and so on. I hesitated, moral qualms surfacing. Taking cash felt different from reclaiming objects that were indisputably mine. But then I remembered how I'd struggled to pay for Noah's asthma medications the month after lending them that money, how I'd had to pick up extra teaching shifts while they took a weekend trip to a bed and breakfast to recover from the stress of the roof repairs. I found an envelope containing exactly $5,000 labeled home improvements. I removed the cash, replacing it with a detailed receipt I'd prepared. Repayment of $5,000 emergency loan provided on April 15, 2022, originally promised to be returned within 6 months. Terms fulfilled on December 2, 2025. With my car loaded, I returned to the house for one final task. At the dining room table, the very table where my family had been excluded, I sat down and wrote a letter explaining my actions. Dear Mom and Dad, today, I reclaimed items that rightfully belong to me, some of which I've been asking to have returned for years. I've also terminated my unpaid work managing Dad's business accounts. Login information is in the envelope on his desk, and reclaimed the $5,000 loan that was never repaid. This isn't about revenge for Thanksgiving. That incident was merely the culmination of a pattern that's existed my entire adult life, a pattern where my value in this family seems directly tied to my compliance with your expectations. I'm not cutting you out of my life or my children's lives. But our relationship needs to change. I will no longer accept being treated as less than, nor will I allow Emma and Noah to believe that's what they deserve from family. When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than control and conditional approval, I'm open to that conversation. Until then, I've returned your spare key and ask that you respect my boundaries by not coming to my home unannounced or contacting my children directly without my permission. Heather. I left the letter propped against the centerpiece on the dining room table where it couldn't be missed. Then I placed their spare house key beside it, closed the front door behind me, and drove away feeling lighter than I had in years. The reaction was swift and explosive, exactly as I'd anticipated. My phone began ringing while I was still unloading the car at my apartment. My father, then my mother, then my father again. I let all calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on finding places for the reclaimed items in our home. Emma was particularly enchanted with my grandmother's jewelry, especially the gold locket that contained tiny photographs of my great-grandparents. "Will this be mine someday?" she asked, holding the locket carefully in her small palm. "Yes," I told her. "That's how family heirlooms work. They get passed down from generation to generation. It's like a piece of history you can touch," she said with unexpected insight. The voicemails progressed from shocked outrage to wounded indignation. My father threatened legal action, claiming I had stolen from them. My mother alternated between tearful recriminations about how I could do this to my own parents and cold fury over my selfish, ungrateful behavior. I listened to each message once, then saved them in a special folder. Not to revisit and re-injure myself, but as documentation and a reminder of why I'd taken this stand. By Sunday evening, my parents had moved on to recruiting allies. My Aunt Judith called, her voice cautious. "Heather, your mother is beside herself. She says you broke into their house and took things." "I used the spare key they've always kept for me," I clarified. "And I only took items that belong to me, things I've been asking to have returned for years." She mentioned the emergency fund money, a loan they never repaid, despite promising to do so within 6 months. I left a receipt. Judith was quiet for a moment. "The Thanksgiving thing was wrong," she finally said. "What Nancy did to you and the children." I told her so at the time. But not during the dinner itself, I pointed out. Not when it might have made a difference. "You're right," she acknowledged. I should have spoken up sooner. We all should have. The conversation ended civilly, with Judith promising to talk some sense into Nancy, though I had little hope of that succeeding. My brother Thomas called next. "Holy shit," he said when I answered. "The house looks like a crime scene with all the yellow sticky notes Mom's putting on everything, marking what belongs to who so nothing else goes missing." Despite everything, this image made me laugh. Well, at least she's being proactive about property rights now. Dad's talking about changing the locks. They're welcome to do that. I returned their spare key. "Look," Thomas said, his voice turning serious, "I think what you did was extreme, but I get why you did it. That Thanksgiving dinner was messed up. And I should have said something." His acknowledgement meant more than he probably realized. The family quickly divided into camps. My mother's side, including Aunt Patricia and Cousin Rebecca, rallied behind my parents, sharing outraged Facebook posts about the younger generation's entitlement and the death of family respect without naming me directly. My father's younger brother, Uncle David, and his wife reached out with surprising support. "We've watched how they've treated you for years," Uncle David wrote in an email. "It took courage to stand up for yourself and your children. If you need anything, we're here." Most touching was a card that arrived from my young cousin Amber, Rebecca's 16-year-old daughter. "What you did was badass. Grandma Nancy and Grandpa Robert have always been mean to you for no reason. You're my hero for standing up to them." The note made me smile through tears. I hadn't realized the younger generation had been watching and understanding the dynamics I'd tried so hard to normalize. A week after the incident, as it was now being called in family circles, my father showed up at my workplace. I was fortunately teaching an evening class when he arrived, and the department secretary, who had strict instructions not to disrupt classes for personal visits, turned him away. He left a formal-looking envelope with her. Inside was a letter printed on his business letterhead, demanding the return of all stolen property within 48 hours, or he would be forced to take legal action. He'd included an itemized list of what he claimed I'd taken, inflating the value of each item and including several things I hadn't touched. I showed the letter to a lawyer friend, who laughed and said, "He doesn't have a case. Everything you took was either gifted to you, lent by you, or owed to you. His letter is just intimidation." Still, the confrontation at my workplace crossed another line. I emailed my father. "Do not come to my workplace again. All future communication must be in writing until further notice." The items I reclaimed were legally mine. I have documentation for everything, including the unpaid loan. I'm open to resolving this conflict through family counseling when you and Mom are ready. 2 weeks passed with no direct contact. Through the family grapevine, I heard my parents were telling everyone I'd had some kind of breakdown, and they were giving me space to come to my senses. The narrative infuriated me, but I refused to engage in public rebuttals. Instead, I focused on rebuilding our family life without the shadow of my parents' disapproval. Emma and Noah gradually stopped asking when they would see their grandparents, especially as the Christmas season brought new activities and experiences. Without the obligation of dividing holiday time between my apartment and my parents' house, I found we had freedom to create our own traditions. We volunteered at a local food bank, attended community events, and spent Christmas Eve with Rachel and her family. My cousin Jessica, who had been at the Thanksgiving dinner, invited us to her family's New Year's gathering. I hesitated, uncertain how I would be received by extended family, but decided to accept. "Will Grandma and Grandpa be there?" Emma asked as we drove to Jessica's house. "No, sweetheart. We probably won't see them for a while." "That's okay," she said after a moment of thought. "They weren't very nice to us anyway." Her simple assessment struck me with its clarity. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. The New Year's gathering was surprisingly warm. Several relatives made a point of including us, and Jessica's husband Brian pulled me aside at one point. "I want you to know that what happened at Thanksgiving." Jessica and I were shocked. "We should have said something. Why didn't you?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. He looked uncomfortable. "Honestly? Fear. Your parents have this way of making people not want to cross them. Which makes what you did even braver." As January turned to February, I maintained my distance while keeping the door open for reconciliation on new terms. My parents made 2 attempts at contact, once leaving gifts for the children on our doorstep, which I returned with a note reiterating my boundaries, and once having their pastor call me to mediate the situation I politely declined, suggesting a professional family therapist instead. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening in my own life. Without the constant undercurrent of trying to earn my parents' approval, I found new confidence at work. I applied for and received a promotion I might previously have talked myself out of pursuing. I started dating again. Cautiously, just coffee with a fellow teacher named Mark who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Most importantly, Emma and Noah were thriving. Without the subtle tension that had always surrounded visits with their grandparents, they seemed more relaxed, more joyful. Noah's teacher commented on his increased participation in class, while Emma's persistent stomachaches, which I now realized had often coincided with planned visits to my parents, disappeared entirely. 6 months after Thanksgiving, my mother sent a letter. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on her personalized stationery. "Heather, your father and I have been doing some reflecting. While we still feel your actions in December were extreme, we recognize that the Thanksgiving dinner arrangements were hurtful to you and the children. We miss Emma and Noah and would like to see them. If you're amenable, perhaps we could meet at a neutral location. That ice cream parlor the children enjoy, perhaps." Mom. Not an apology, exactly, but the closest thing to one I'd ever received from her. No mention of overreaction or making a scene. Just an acknowledgement of hurt and a request rather than a demand. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. After careful consideration, I replied, Mom, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the acknowledgement that what happened at Thanksgiving was hurtful. I'm open to a short, supervised visit at Whimsical Scoops next Saturday at 2 p.m. Before that happens, though, I need to be clear about my boundaries going forward. 1. My children and I will be treated with the same respect as other family members. 2. Criticism disguised as help or advice is not welcome. 3. If these boundaries are crossed, we will leave immediately. If these terms are acceptable, please confirm, and we'll see you Saturday. Heather. The response came the next day, a simple, we agree to your terms. See you Saturday. It wasn't resolution or reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning, a new beginning, on my terms, with my dignity intact. 1 year has passed since that fateful Thanksgiving, and so much has changed. The saying, time heals all wounds, isn't quite accurate in my experience. Time alone doesn't heal. It's what happens during that time that determines whether wounds fester or mend. That first ice cream meeting with my parents was awkward but civil. Emma was cautiously friendly, while Noah, with his 6-year-old's capacity for forgiveness, warmed up more quickly. My mother brought small, appropriate gifts, books they could read together. My father asked about their school activities without any backhanded comments about their educational choices. They stuck to safe topics and respected my presence as a buffer. We've established a new rhythm since then. My parents see the children once every few weeks, usually for specific activities, a baseball game, a school play, an afternoon at the park. Always in public places, always with me present. The visits are shorter, but I've noticed more meaningful. Without the pressure of performing perfect grandparenthood for an entire holiday, my parents actually seem to enjoy the children more. Our adult relationship remains distant but cordial. We don't discuss personal matters beyond the children's activities. I haven't been back to their house, nor have they visited mine. This arrangement, while perhaps sad by conventional standards, has brought a peace I never experienced in our previous dynamic. The boundary setting rippled through other areas of my life as well. I declined additional committee assignments at work that wouldn't advance my career. I became more selective about which of Emma and Noah's activities we committed to, prioritizing their genuine interests over overscheduling. I started saying no without apologizing or justifying my decisions. Mark and I have been dating for 10 months now. He met my parents briefly at Emma's school concert and navigated the encounter with grace, picking up on undercurrents, but not pressing for details until we were alone. When I finally shared the full Thanksgiving story, his response was validating without being inflammatory. They missed out, he said simply. Not just on Thanksgiving dinner, but on really knowing you and the kids. His perspective, that my parents' behavior reflected their limitations, not my worth, helped cement my own evolving understanding. Perhaps the most profound change has been in my relationship with my children. Without the undercurrent of anxiety that had accompanied every interaction with my parents, I'm more present, more confident in my parenting decisions. Emma and Noah sense this shift. They're more open with me, less careful about behaving perfectly as they'd been around their grandparents. Mom, Emma asked recently as we decorated our Christmas tree, remember last Thanksgiving when Grandma and Grandpa didn't have chairs for us? My heart tightened. Yes, I remember. I was so sad that day, she continued, hanging a handmade ornament on a branch. But you know what? I'm glad it happened. You are? I asked, surprised. She nodded solemnly. Because after that, you stopped being sad all the time. And we started doing fun things instead of always going to Grandma's house, where we had to be super quiet and not touch anything. Her perception stunned me. I hadn't realized how visibly my anxiety around my parents had affected her, nor how clearly she'd seen the positive changes in our family life since I'd established boundaries. This Thanksgiving, we created our own celebration. Rachel and her family joined us, along with Mark and two of my colleagues who had no local family. We pushed tables together in my small apartment, used mismatched chairs, and served food buffet style on everyday plates. The children made place cards for everyone, decorated with personalized drawings. Noah insisted on saying grace, thanking God for good food and people who are nice to each other. The contrast to last year's experience couldn't have been starker. In place of rigid formality and exclusion, we had warmth, laughter, and belonging. Everyone had a seat at our table. My brother Thomas called that evening after returning from our parents' more subdued Thanksgiving gathering. It was weird without you guys there, he admitted. Mom actually asked me today if I thought you'd consider coming next year. What did you tell her? I said she'd need to ask you herself, and to be prepared to hear no as an answer. He paused. I'm proud of you, Heather. What you did, it changed things. Mom and Dad are different now. Not completely, but they think before they speak more. They're making an effort. His words were gratifying, but I've learned not to base my decisions on others' changes. My boundaries aren't conditional on my parents' improvement. They're necessary for my well-being regardless. The most profound lesson I've learned through all of this is that family is defined by actions, not blood. True family makes room at the table, literally and figuratively. True family sees you, values you, and respects your dignity even when disagreeing with your choices. I've also learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. By demonstrating self-respect to my children, I'm teaching them what they should expect from relationships. Emma and Noah are learning that love shouldn't require diminishing yourself, that healthy boundaries are acts of care rather than rejection. Forgiveness has been another complicated lesson. I've forgiven my parents not because they've fully acknowledged the hurt they caused. They haven't, but because carrying anger was weighing me down. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means preventing it from controlling my future. As for reconciliation, that remains a work in progress. True reconciliation requires acknowledgement, apology, and changed behavior from all parties. We've taken small steps in that direction, but complete healing may never come, and I've made peace with that possibility. The path forward isn't about perfect resolution, but about continued growth. I'm learning to parent without the shadow of my own childhood, to form relationships without fear of conditional love, to trust my own judgment without seeking external validation. If you're watching this and relating to my experience, please know you're not alone. Family dynamics can be incredibly painful, especially when they're wrapped in the expectation that blood ties trump all other considerations. But standing in your truth, setting healthy boundaries, and prioritizing your well-being isn't selfish, it's essential. Have you ever had to stand up to family who treated you unfairly? What boundaries have you set in your own relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Each time we share these difficult truths, we help others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, everyone deserves a seat at the table, especially in the families we choose to build ourselves.